Now, some of the previous episodes that we've done, we've had, some comments and feedback. And obviously we've done it on topics or on things which people may find, they might not take a liking to it, etc. And there's quite a few comments, etc., that say that, these, they claim that like, these Deobandis, they talk about X, Y, and Z, or they're saying X, Y, and Z. And when it comes to, their own scholars, then they don't say anything, or these kind of comments have come about, right? So I just want to ask you outright, we have to clarify these things, because this is, is important. Are you Deobandi?
What gives it away?
Huh?
What gives it away?
It's the glasses.
Okay, fair enough. It's actually a very, because we actually spoke about it beforehand. I thought it was interesting. It was good that we tackle this question briefly, because we're going to go into the book reviews. But because anyone that talks about any topic, naturally people want to know the background of the person. And that's fair. We do all the time when we're doing reviews. We're looking at, trying to find information about them so we can get a better understanding of where these people are coming from. So the question of are we, or am I, or as an institution, are we Deobandi? First things first, when we talk about Deoband, or especially stuff like Deobandism, then we don't have an official group with membership. There's no secret meetings. Not that I'm not been invited to any, but I'm pretty sure there's no secret meetings or membership.
Maybe right? You just don't know about them.
Yeah, but there's no head, someone that you follow. But I want to respond to this in a way that I don't go down the route of sloganeering where I just say that Deoband is Ahl Sunnah, and nor do I move away from saying, Deoband is just a town. Just like, just one town amongst other towns. To kind of give the answer with some meaning. That's what's important, right? So before we want to answer the question of are we Deobandi, we have to kind of work out what exactly is Deoband and what does Deoband represent and what is our connection to Deoband. Because now, before we go to that, so let's answer these questions. So Deoband, as we know, is a town in northern India, and where there's a madrasa built. And it doesn't start off as a movement in the sense of here's a leader trying to establish certain, like a political movement, a party. Anything, nothing like that, right? There could be people amongst them that have those goals and intentions, but I'm saying is the idea of itself is a madrasa. So you establish a madrasa and you have like-minded people. And the like-minded people tend to be people that they came from the Hanafi background, right? They were generally associated with the Kalam schools, but you will see there's a different relationship with Kalam depending on the Deobandi scholars. But they came from Kalami school, the Ash'ari Maturidi school, and they were connected to the Sufi Turuq, right? Loosely said, right? That's what the Darul Deoband, the teachers, etc. were. And so naturally, those who were going to study there, they will also learn this type of Islam. But it was an educational reform movement, trying to educate Muslims and masses to bring them back to Islam. But as you'd expect with any madrasa, there will be some characteristics that kind of stand out. So if you're talking about are we Deobandi in terms of, so what does this Darul Deoband do then? So Darul Deoband, it has this method of within 6 months you have in Saharanpur, not too far from there, you have another madrasa, Mazar-e-Ulum, which is a sister institution. And within the span of a few years, you see the madrasa kind of brings up multiple other institutions. And thereafter, you have this notion of graduates that go on and establish another madrasa. And again, when these madrasa are being established, there isn't necessarily a formal recognition to say you're Deobandi. So for example, when we want to set up a madrasa, for example, as being graduates of one of these institutions, because our madrasas will eventually connect back to Darul Deoband, right? So we have Imam Zakaria Academy. Imam Zakaria Academy founder is a graduate of Darul Berry. Darul Berry is connected to Mawlana Murtada Rahimullah, connects back to Sheikh Zakaria, and then you can go back to Mazar-e-Ulum, back to Darul Deoband. So every madrasa you have eventually. So if you're saying Deobandi like that, then yes, there is a connection going back to the Darul Deoband.
A senate of madrasas,
if you like, yeah. So you go back to it, and that's the first point. So in that sense, yes, this is how our institution goes back to. But the other thing that makes the answer a bit more complicated is that there isn't a single individual, right? So it's not
centralized.
Yeah, in the sense, not just centralized, you don't have a leader.
Yeah.
So one is like you have a madrasa that heads it. You don't have an individual that runs the show. So there is no single person that says, well, this is Deoband for us. So like currently, if you talk about Deobandism, you probably say Mufti Taqi Usmani is the most highest representative of what Deobandi is. But if you were to go Pakistan and look at Pakistani polemics, there'll be other Deobandi scholars saying, well, we disagree with you on X, Y, and Z, and a whole host of things. So, and they are also Deobandis. They also have connections that go back to Darul Deoband. So because the reason for this is that it started off as a madrasa. And when you start something as a madrasa, you're going to have different people that have variations in ideas and thoughts and methods, whether that will be political, whether that will be theological. But when we're talking about these kind of differences, it doesn't necessarily have to be significant, but there's natural type of differences. Some are differences in, let's say, perspectives. When we say theology, that sounds very significant. What we mean by that is like, if you look at Mawlana Rashid Ahmed Gangohi and Mawlana Qasim Nanotwi, and you compare their method of approach to kalam and the aqliyat, the rational sciences, it's very different. Right, and any person can read this. It's not too hard to find this. Read any Mawlana Qasim Nanotwi's books, read the Fatawa of Mawlana Gangohi on aqaid issues. You can see the difference between them in terms of method. So there's a whole lot of letters that have been preserved and talking about their perspective, the views on this. So you have differences like that because it's a madrasa. But at the same time, it's not all over the place completely because you have a similar upbringing in terms of similar teachers.
Stay within the tradition.
Similar tradition, yes. It would be a Hanafi tradition. It's connected to the Ash'ari Maturidi school. And then you have a connection with Sufi Turuq, as I mentioned, right? And then, like, for example, certain views, so this is on furu'at, these are not necessarily usul, but on certain positions, they become quite popular having certain positions. So when it comes to Mawlid, the Deobandis are recognized as generally being not people who perform Mawlid, although the way they disagree with it could slightly vary, but generally speaking, the Deobandi scholars would not practice the Mawlid. So that's a fara', that's not a usul. Because when you look at the usul of bid'ah, that would be a different question, right? So when we're talking about are we Deobandi, so I would say this is a tradition that we've studied under, and we have a connection there. But that connection is not a connection of like a centralized rule where there's, like I said, membership or individual, etc. So therefore, there's no such thing as a gotcha moment. So if someone said to me that, like last episode, we spoke about Mawlana Ashraf Ali Thanwi and shirk and ibadah. So if you turn around to me and say, oh, but we found this book from this Deobandi scholar who's the Khalifa of so-and-so, and he said to the contrary, okay, like what do you want me to do? There's no such thing I can go back and they say, go and sort this out amongst the Deobandis. Well, I'll say, there is no Deobandi conference. So what do you want me to do? Like, who do I go to and things? So it's a very decentralized notion, but there's this association from madaris and a loose connection that we have on certain views and perspectives. But because, as I said, it's a madrasa, you would see sometimes even similar positions. This is something I discussed in my PhD. You sometimes have similar positions, but the approach of how they get to those similar positions are different, right? And sometimes they have different positions completely. So, for example, just to kind of highlight this, is that if you look at the Deobandi madrasa and you look at where does the inspiration come from? So one of the key inspirations of the madrasa Deoband, as the senior Deobandi scholars or those who in Darul Deoband would claim, is from Shah Waliullah. But then Shah Waliullah's approach to Hanafi fiqh and the issue of taqleed is very different to how the mainstream associates of Darul Deoband or those from Madrasa Deoband would be associated with. So that straight away you can confuse the line. So if I come across today and I say, well, if Darul Deoband is representative of Shah Waliullah, then I'm going to take on Shah Waliullah's approach, and that's the Deobandi approach. And there's precedent for this as well, for people doing this. So it does complicate the picture. So when I say, are we Deobandi? We say, well, yes, that's where our madaris and that's where our nisbah goes to. And it's not like Azhari per se, because Azhar is far more open.
It's in one place as well.
There's more of a personality to Deoband. There's more of a history to associate with certain views. So it's not easy to define because, like I said, we're not going back to a single individual. For example, for those who say, I know people don't say, but let's say someone says they're Barelvi. And when they're saying Barelvi, they're saying we are attributing ourselves to Mawlana Ahmad Raza Khan. It becomes easy now to define to some degree. It's because I would say, well, you said this, Mawlana Ahmad Raza Khan said this. How do you explain your nisbah? Just like we said, we're Hanafis, it's back to Imam Abu Hanifa. If you can prove something about Imam Abu Hanifa, then it is and I'm saying Hanafi is some of a gotcha moment, saying, oh, you got you because he's saying to the contrary. But when you're saying, like I said, as Deoband, it's a madrasa. Now, the reason why things get further complicated, like I said, we can discuss this in my PhD with examples whenever in the future, right? But just to complicate the discussion more is that the subcontinent is predominantly in Urdu. So a lot of the writings of these scholars is in Urdu. So when, for example, you yourself is from IZA, you used to study Imam Zakariya Academy. You're going to graduate, inshallah, you graduate this year. You don't know Urdu, right?
No.
You can't read Urdu.
No.
So your connections, because of this, the global village we live in, you probably have very minimal connection with the senior Deobandi scholars.
Munqati'.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a gap between you and the Deobandi scholars, right? The senior scholars. So unless when you're reading hadith, you may be reading Faydul Bari, maybe, or Badul Majhood. But in terms of like their Sawani Hayat, like their life stories and the Malfuzat, some in Arabic, but generally speaking, your association is not going to be with those senior scholars. So what happens now is that in the West, not just West overall, because people have access to so much different scholars, you can be maybe studying in Darul Deoband while reading the writings of a Salafi Sheikh in Medina, right? We could be here in the UK and connection going back to these scholars, but we may be reading the books. Also, for example, if you're into Lugha, right, you may not be inspired by a Deobandi scholar, but you may be inspired by an Arab scholar that you like, or some scholar from somewhere else. So that would be your nisbah to them, which had been different 30 years ago, because you'd be much more entrenched in the system. But because there's a language separation, a cultural separation now, these terms, when we say Deobandi,
seems very distant.
It becomes very distant for people.
Yeah.
So these kind of things need to be untangled.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to turn around and say, oh, Deoband is meaningless. It's just a town, right? And nor am I going to say that Deoband is X, Y, and Z. I think that the correct answer to this is somewhere in between. But you have to realize that the vagueness is because of the fact that it is a madrasa. It has teachers. And when you have different scholars, part of a madrasa, you're not going to get the same views.
They're not going to be monolithic.
Yeah, and it's not. You go to one madrasa itself. You're here studying here. Are you telling me each teacher is exactly the same?
Of course not.
No.
Even in the same class, like our class, we have, like my own example, myself. I'm more into the naqliyat. For me, hadith is, I'm interested in my hadith studies, whatever. But then other students in the class are more into aqliyat. They like their rational sciences. They like the kalam, etc. And that's in the same class. And that's in every class. And
then this can actually go into material differences as well.
Yeah.
Right. So you may have differences of opinion. So when we're talking differences, we don't have to talk about, the foundations of Islam. We're saying differences in Masail, and then differences in who you're inspired by. And this is a natural result of madrasa. If there's a personality that we're following, that's different then. Because
it becomes difficult to then change that.
Yeah, because you have to then openly say that I disagree with the personality. So this is why I think it's a discussion that needs to be had in more depth. And it's something that this is what I mentioned, my PhD is on this topic in far more detail. But we can maybe discuss that in the future. But it's just to highlight that, yes, this is our tradition, that where we study from. These are the scholars that but like I said, a lot of the scholars that I read, because of the access we have to information and books, maybe a whole host of scholars on different backgrounds. So we're not restricted to maybe the madrasa as maybe people would have been 40, 50 years ago, because you're in the madrasa, these are your mashayikh, these are your kitabs you're going to read, and you're much more, and it's a language as well. So we're not going to read as much as Urdu, right? So because even though I can read Urdu, it's not going to be the books that I go to so much. So then again, there's that little distance. And I remember when I finished madrasa, I graduated, I hardly read Urdu at that time. So I couldn't tell you like a basic chronology of who the senior Deobandi scholars were. So despite us saying that we are connected to Darul Deoband or Deobandi in some degree, right? I could not give you a basic chronology of who came first, who came, when Imran Thanwi passed away, when did this, what books did they write? I couldn't tell you any of that. And that was because it's not part of the madrasa itself. So that's when people say that, oh, you Deobandi said this, or your Akabir said this. They should realize that most students haven't got a clue who you're talking about.
Me included.
Yeah. So if I said to you, I go like, oh, did you know Mawlana Manazi Ahsan Gilani, who predominantly wrote in Urdu, said, you won't know who I'm talking about, right? And then even like Moran Gangohi, you hear names, but you've probably never read his fatwa, because most of the stuff is...
A lot of times that teachers will say names as references that this sheikh did this sheikh did this.
And these are, I'm just mentioning the famous names. There's hundreds of people that are like the khulafa, and those who come after, or mudarris in this place, and teacher in Jami Faruqi, and you don't have any connection because we don't go there, a lot of us. So because it was my effort as part of my dissertation, I learned much more about these names, but the average student has no idea. So when people say, oh, but your Deobandi scholar said this, it's like, well, would you expect? It's madrasa is thousands of us, and no one's dictating. So when you graduate, there's no one on your head saying, do you agree with all these set views that we've said? Or how do you explain this ibarat in this book? How do you explain that ibarat in this book? And I'll be like, well, I've never read that book. It's not been part of my syllabus. We don't study that. I've never heard of it. Right? So people come and say, how do you explain this ibarat? For most people, you go to them and say, what ibarat? What are you talking about? What book is this? I never heard. Who's the author even? Right? You say, well, this person, I don't know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's not, in essence, anything like it's a connection. It's a meaningful connection.
Yeah.
But it's not in the rigid sense of a movement with some sort of membership that people may see.
Yeah.
So that's why when we talk about groups, when we say stuff like Wahhabi, Deobandi, Barelvi, Ahli Hadith, Salafi, whatever terms you're using, Ikhwani, there's a whole host of terms we use. Each one has its nuance in how we define that. And for some, it's more easy than others. So when we talk about, let's say like Hizb ut-Tahrir as example, Hizb ut-Tahrir has membership.
Yeah.
Right? So when we talk about Hizb ut-Tahrir, it's far more easier for me to know what we're talking about. So if you're a Hizb member, I can quite easily say, well, this is what your core texts have said. How do you respond to that? They can't turn around and say, I don't believe in that part of Hizb, because it's a membership group.
Yeah.
You see, so you have core values.
You're subscribing to those values.
Exactly. But when you're talking about, let's say, Ahli Hadith, even the term itself is quite vague. It follows of Hadith. So that straight away would mean that your nisbah would be more vague and more open.
Yeah.
But when I say Wahhabi, if someone is saying they're Wahhabi, right? And they're saying they're restricted to Muhammad Wahhab, it's more restrictive because you've told us who your nisbah is to.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what we're talking about. Anyway, that's quite long, but you get that.
Yeah. Just not everyone's going to be a part of a monolithic structure.
Yeah. It depends on the nature of the group, I'm saying.
Exactly.
This is the Deobandi is a madrasa.
Yeah.
So that's something that's very important to realize. And it doesn't mean that they don't have an identity. There's not views that they hold. I'm not saying that. But it's going to be a loose association. There's always going to be people that are going to be outside, and not just like one, two. There've been sometimes numerous people. And sometimes there have been significant differences of a whole host of issues.
Yeah.
And we can go through them. We don't have an issue. I don't want to go open up those kind of rooms right now because that's not the purpose of today's podcast.
Yeah.
But it's just something to highlight. So when people say to me, are you Deobandi or are we Deobandi? And then to say, well, no one's actually done this, but maybe they have, maybe not on the comments. I don't know, but people have said, like, how do you explain this? I'm not at liberty to explain because I don't have any membership to this group, or nor have I said that I associate with or I ascribe to everything that this has been said.
Yeah.
Right? If it's there, if it's a mistake, okay, it's a mistake. What do you want to do about it?
That's the way it should be.
Yeah. Just,